Welcome you all to the What to Expect During Your Stage 1 Audit webinar. My name is Joseph Krolikowski and I am the Technical Director of Perry Johnson Registrars as well as a sitting member of our Executive Committee. Couple of notes for everyone on our call today. All participants are in mute, but we absolutely want to address your questions. So please use the question portion of the dashboard. We will take your questions at the conclusion of the presentation. I'll also note that the presentation, the slides, will be available for download shortly after we're done. And this webinar and all other past PGR webinars can be reviewed on our website under previously recorded webinars. Our presentation today is going to cover a couple of topics. We're going to address why the Stage 1 audit is even done in the first place. We'll address some of the pre-Stage 1 activities, the quotation and review. We'll talk about what the Stage 1 audit looks at kind of front to back. We'll address some things that can prevent your company continuing on to the Stage 2, some strategies for responding to recommendations, and then at the end, some concluding remarks and your questions. Now, as to why we do a two-stage process, a Stage 1 and a Stage 2, well, the simple answer is we do it that way because we are required to. Among the many things that we have to abide by is the ISO 17021 standard. That is then enforced by the accreditation bodies that we answer to. That standard has a clause that reads in part that the initial certification audit of a management system shall be conducted in two stages, Stage 1 and Stage 2. Now, kind of the larger big picture reason why they do that is they want to be sure that only those companies that are truly prepared to have a certification assessment are permitted to go through the full audit. So in other words, before we expend all kinds of travel expense, all kinds of logistical expense, let's make sure that the companies that are going through the more full Stage 2 assessment are truly ready to do so. Obviously, it all begins at the quotation phase. You have to be obviously a PGR contracted client before we can perform a Stage 1 audit at your facility. And we use the quotation phase as a means of gathering some of that information that's going to help ensure that the Stage 1 audit goes smoothly. We have a series of documents called F1, the F1 series, and they are intended to help us gather this information in an effective way. The F1 series documents, they are complex, they are scope specific, and they're intended to gather a multitude of information. Now obviously the more information we can get from you up front, in some cases we can give you a more competitive quotation, but additionally we can give you some early heads up on some logistical readiness issues or challenges that might come up during the Stage 1 assessment. Now as to our quote on time, let's talk about that briefly. Another document that we are held accountable to comes from the International Accreditation Forum, or IAF. Now you can think of the IAF as kind of the top tier in the enforcement game. The accreditation bodies all report to the IAF. They have a series of documents called mandatory documents, and mandatory document number 5, or MD5, it provides some guidelines that we have to follow in terms of audit time. And it stipulates that the maximum amount of audit time that we can discount is 30%. So in other words, if you're getting a quotation from say 3 CBs and one of them comes in extremely low, you need to be careful about that. You need to be wary, is this being done correctly and meeting all of the various industry requirements? Because if it isn't, that can bring into question the legitimacy of the certification that you receive later. Now, prior to the stage one, once we have you under contract, you are assigned to an audit program coordinator, more commonly referred to as a scheduler. And the scheduler is going to service all the needs that you have. They're going to be your primary point of contact. Think of them as kind of cradle-to-grave client management. And they are required to, among other things, to assign an auditor to you that is both qualified in the standard that you're seeking and competent in your particular technical area. So for example, if you are a company that does plastic injection molding and you are seeking certification to the TS 16949 standard for automotive, we have to make sure that the auditor we send you is accredited through the IATF as an auditor for TS, and additionally that this person has sufficient knowledge or experience of plastic injection molding. Those two criteria obviously are very important to fulfill. Now obviously we also want to provide someone to you that is geographically friendly, you might say, someone that's close by. So now we have three criteria to fulfill: competent in the standard, competent in your technical area, and as close to your facility as possible. Now another thing that your scheduler will do prior to the stage one is they will send you what we call an attestation of readiness. In other words, saying, yes, we are ready for this stage one assessment. We call this the F108. Once you sign off on that, that indicates that you are affirming we are ready for this assessment. We are ready to go through the stage one assessment to the best of our knowledge. So let's talk a little bit about this F108 document and what it stipulates and how it will help outline what's going to be reviewed. There's a number of things that are called out. Now some of these are going to vary a little bit by the standard that you're going for, but most of these are universal. You have to affirm that you know what the scope of your system is, that you've considered exclusions or exemptions, that you know what your processes are, and that you have put together something that stipulates how those processes interact, that you know for each of your processes how you're going to measure the effectiveness of those processes, key performance indicators, that you have performance data that's going to back up what those measurables are. We have a document that we provide called the F191. That is a document that serves to kind of cross-reference the clauses of the standard that you're seeking certification to with the processes that you've established. And again, this is you saying we've established a system that meets all of the requirements for the standard that we're seeking. All of our processes taken together meet up with these requirements. In the area of the internal audit, do you have your internal audit records put together? Do you have competency records for your internal auditors? Have you conducted a management review? Have you considered and are you controlling both outsourced processes and applicable statutory and regulatory requirements? And then for certain standards, do you have the required documentation? For example, in TS 16949, you're required to have 7 procedures. Have those requirements been met? So a number of things that you're affirming by completing the F108. Now the F191, again, let's revisit this just a bit and talk about why we require this, or at least ask for it. It's intended to help ensure that the processes you've established for your system in total represent a fulfillment of all the clauses of the applicable standard. The intent here is for you to tell us these are the processes I've established for my system, and these are how these processes fit into this standard that I have asked you to certify me to. So let's look at an example. Let's say that this is the raw interaction of processes that we have been given, and we'll note down here that this company has 6 core processes that it has called out as being applicable to its quality system. We have our 6 processes listed here: sales order entry, purchasing, production, shipping, quality, and support. So let's build these into the F191. And here we are. We now have our 6 processes called out here. We have the 7 auditable portions of, in this case, ISO 9001-2015, and this organization has mapped out for us where these various processes intersect with the clauses of the standard. In some cases, it is every single clause, so in this case the support processes. In some cases, it's just a few. Purchasing, for example, they're indicating that it's strictly clause 8.4 and 7.5. You'll note that 8.3 has been left blank. We would take that to indicate that this company is seeking an exemption from design, and so forth. So again, the items that need to go in this column are your processes, the ones that you've identified as being applicable to your system. Not the sections of the standard, not the departments of your company, but your processes. Now, to kind of walk you through the Stage 1 audit front to back, let's talk a little bit about what should happen and how these are rolled out. Now, we do have off-site Stage 1 audits for simple ISO 9001 management systems. We do offer that, but you need to bear in mind that when that is done, in the end it means more total on-site time, because we have to add time to the Stage 2 audit to officially close out the Stage 1. Most of the Stage 1s are in fact done on-site. It's mandatory for all other scopes, and we do a fair number of on-site ISO 9001 Stage 1 audits as well. Now, before your auditor arrives, you should be contacted at least a few days in advance of the Stage 1, and that's applicable whether or not it is being done at your facility or not. You should receive an audit plan, and it's important that you review that audit plan and make sure that all of the content is correct, and absolutely let your auditor know if any aspect of that audit plan is not correct. The audit itself, when it begins, there is a mandatory opening meeting. This is a good chance for you to confirm any last-minute changes in the details to make sure that your auditor is aware of any critical information. If you've got any visitors that are going to be coming, or key personnel that need to step out at one time or another, always a good thing to let your auditor know about. And at that point, the Stage 1 audit will proceed from the opening meeting according to the auditor's plan. And the way that we facilitate these audits is we have a Stage 1 workbook. And again, these are put together on a scope-specific basis. We have them for ISO 9001, we have them for ISO 14001, and so forth. And just about everything that is looked at in a Stage 1 audit is documentation-based in nature. You know, we had an early look at the items that were called out on the F108, management review, internal audit, your performance data. All of these items are documentation-based. So expect that the Stage 1 audit, if it's done on site, will be primarily a conference room type activity. Now, for every item that the auditor reviews, they're given two options in completing the Stage 1 report. Either conforms, obviously that's the one we're hoping for, or concern. And a concern should be interpreted as anything that represents a disconnect between what you've implemented and the related requirement from the applicable standard. Now, once the auditor has completed their review of the required materials, they're going to need some time to prepare their audit report. Now, an important thing for you to bear in mind, although we do document concerns, there are no nonconformances issued in the Stage 1 audit. You're not going to receive a set of NCRs and then be preparing corrective actions for those NCRs. The Stage 1 audit is the only audit where that is the case. Now, once the report is completed, the closing meeting will be held, and in terms of the final outcome, there are three official outcomes that can be reached. Number one, a recommendation to continue on to Stage 2 with no concerns. Secondly, a recommendation to continue to Stage 2, but with some concerns, and we'll go over some of what that might include in just a minute. Or, in certain cases, a recommendation that the Stage 1 audit has to be done over again, a repeating of the Stage 1 audit. Now, you will be asked by your auditor to sign an acknowledgement of the results, and you will be given a copy of the completed audit report. Now, obviously, due to travel circumstances, it may be a few additional days before you get your report, but we do instruct our auditors to be conscientious and to get that report done as soon as possible. Now, in terms of things that can stand in the way of you continuing on to the Stage 2 audit, there's a number of things that can cause that, and we'd like to go over some of the more important ones here in our presentation. First of all, an inadequate or inappropriate interaction of processes. If you have not done an effective job of identifying what your processes are and understanding how they interact and understanding what the measures are for those processes, that can represent a problem. So if we have something that represents the Plan, Do, Check, Act diagram from the standard itself, if you've just recreated that four-part diagram that appears in the standard, if you've been given something that's canned from a consultant and it does not reflect what your processes are, those are all things that can be problematic. You need to think of your interaction of processes as something that is unique to your organization. In order to help with this, we've actually developed a separate webinar. We have a webinar entitled The Interaction of Processes and Its Importance to a Successful Audit. It's actually a webinar that I personally present. We've done it now more than a few times. It's available for viewing under previously recorded webinars, and we do deliver it every other month. So we definitely encourage you to make use of that webinar. The interaction of processes is absolutely the single best indicator that you understand the process approach that's prescribed in ISO 9001 and other related standards. If we see that you do not have effective process measures established, or if you have process measures but no performance data, these can both be problematic. Both versions of ISO 9001, the 2008 and 2015, they both require you to monitor, measure, and where applicable to analyze your processes. So our expectation is that every process on your interaction of processes document, every single one of those processes needs to be monitored or measured, and there should be performance data for every single one of those measurements. Now, there are some standards that have minimum requirements for the amount of data that must be available. For example, TS 16949 requires 12 months worth of performance data before you can complete your Stage 1 audit. Now for some other standards, ISO 9001 for example, we have to have some evidence that demonstrates that the process is working. Now, for a lot of smaller organizations, they may choose to have just a few measures of effectiveness that cover all processes. That is considered generally acceptable as well. So whatever process measures you choose to stand behind, you need to be prepared to explain how these reflect on the processes that you've established for your quality system. Another item that can be problematic is an inadequate internal audit. So in terms of what we are looking for, we're looking to see that your internal audits are planned. So that could be as simple as an audit schedule. We're looking to see that between the audit notes and any applicable audit reports, that all of your processes and all of the related requirements were in fact audited. Sometimes we'll come in and we'll see for the record of the internal audit, it'll be just the nonconformances. And certainly the nonconformances are a required part as well, but having a handful of nonconformances doesn't give us assurance that the rest of your quality system was included in the internal audit process. So we need to see that that was done. If nonconformances are discovered, we need to see that those have been responded to, that corrective actions have been formulated or are in process at minimum. And then obviously making sure that your audit team does not audit their own work. Now, special note here, we can recommend you to continue to Stage 2 if you're in a position where you've not completed the full internal audit, but you can show us that it has been planned. We can still recommend your continuance to Stage 2 in that circumstance. However, if that is what happens, you do lose the benefit of getting some initial feedback on your internal audit prior to the Stage 2 audit. And again, to remind you, there are no nonconformances that are issued in a Stage 1. There are absolutely nonconformances in a Stage 2 assessment. So kind of bear that in mind and take a risk-based model with that particular item. Another item related to internal audit, we will see inadequate or missing internal auditor competency records. Now, bear in mind, the standards across the board for the most part all allow for an organization to establish their own requirements for what makes an internal auditor competent. There are some exceptions in certain standards, but obviously for ISO 9001 this is absolutely the case. You will define your own competency requirements and you will take the steps necessary to make sure that your internal auditors meet those requirements. The auditor is going to ask to see proof that you've done that and proof that you've lived up to your own expectations. Now, as I mentioned, some standards, some industries require additional provisions. For example, in the automotive world, if you supply to Ford, there are additional requirements from Ford Motor that pertain to internal auditors, and you need to be sure that you are cognizant of those requirements and meeting those requirements. The management review can present a problem as well. You need to make sure that your records of management review reflect a discussion of all the required topics, all the required inputs, all the required outputs. Now sometimes when we ask for the evidence of the management review, we'll be given the PowerPoint slides, the items that were used to facilitate the meeting. That's good information to have, but we also need to have records of the results of those discussions. So what was what were the fruits of these discussions when you went over customer complaints or when you went over the results of the internal audit? Now, in a similar vein to what we just mentioned with the internal audit, we can recommend a continuance to stage 2 if you can show that the management review meeting has been planned. If you've not done it but can show that it's been planned, we can still recommend a continuance to stage 2. However, once again, you lose the benefit of getting initial feedback on your management review process prior to stage 2, and again, there are no nonconformances in a stage 1. So again, bear that in mind. Now, the stage 1 audit reports, they all come through PJR headquarters, and they are subject to a review by a member of the PJR Executive Committee to ensure that the decisions reached are appropriate and fair. So we do have obviously oversight on what the auditor is recommending. And as our client, you are also afforded the right to dispute a conclusion or to appeal a conclusion. That process is discussed in PJR Procedure Pro 10. Pro 10 is available to you anytime on our website. Now, if the recommendation is to repeat the stage 1 audit, we obviously encourage you to work from your audit report. The audit report at that point can be thought of as a punch list on what needs to be fixed in order to be ready to have a more satisfactory outcome for the next stage 1 audit. And you are absolutely permitted to remain in contact with your auditor and with those of us here on the Executive Committee to discuss what you're doing and make sure that you're on the right path to having a more satisfactory result next time. If the recommendation is to proceed to stage 2, ideally we like to see a minimum of 30 days between the stage 1 and the stage 2. 60 to 75 days is even better. And you know, the reason for this is that even a handful of concerns, they all still need to be addressed. They all still need to be closed out, or they can turn into nonconformances that you then have to formulate systemic corrective actions to during stage 2. Most of the time when we have a client that wants to have a back-to-back audit with just a very small amount of time in between, it's problematic. It seems like it almost always leads to trouble. We do have a 21-day cancellation policy, and that holds regardless if the stage 1 and stage 2 were scheduled with fewer than 21 days between them. In conclusion, we want you, our clients, to feel confident and comfortable with the stage 1 audit. We want to make sure that this is a good experience for you. So we do try to take some care in the pre-stage 1 audit phase, and we want to make sure that you feel you're being supported by both your auditor and those of us here on the Executive Committee to make this process as seamless as it can possibly be. We absolutely wish you every success in your certification journey. At this time, I'm going to go ahead and unlock the questions from the dashboard here. And let's see if we've got any questions. Okay. Ali Ghazi, I do hope I'm pronouncing that right. We want to update our QMS from ISO 9001-2008 to 2015. Are we required to have a 2-phase audit? If you're already certified to ISO 9001-2008, you are not required to resubmit to a stage 1 audit. That would only be required if your certification were to lapse. Peter Wilson asks, you mentioned that for ISO 9001 there is a requirement for some data for the stage 1 audit. Is there a specific amount of time, such as 30 calendar days? Peter, we don't have a specific threshold that we hold our clients accountable to. We need to feel assured that the processes are being measured. We need something tangible that we can look at. We cannot just presume based on the measures alone that there's going to be data there. You need to be able to show that you've established the measures and that you have performance data for those measures. No minimum threshold, but we need to see that those measures are in fact being measured. Brundaban Patra asks, what are the documents required to assess the auditor? And I'm going to presume that you mean the internal auditor, your internal auditor. That is for you to decide as the stakeholders within the organization. We are simply going to hold you accountable to your own internal expectations. Okay. Michelle Davis-Lawson asks, will the Stage 1 and Stage 2 auditor be the same? Generally, if the Stage 1 audit is done on-site, we do like for the Stage 1 and Stage 2 auditor to be the same person. Obviously, there are some circumstances, travel, illness, and so forth that can prevent that from happening, but generally, yes, we do try to strive to have that be the case. Okay. Anne Cartwright, again, I do hope I'm pronouncing that right. What if you are a new QC manager and you started a facility that is already scheduled on their audits and you cannot find the necessary documents for the audit? Okay. Well, Anne, if the Stage 1 audit uncovers issues and there are missing documents, obviously we would assess that accordingly during the Stage 1 audit. If it means that you have to repeat the Stage 1 audit, I'm afraid that's what it would mean. To kind of put it in a simple term, we meet you like we find you, and whatever is available is what is available for review during the audit process. Mike Wilson asks, is the process flowchart a requirement of ISO 9001:2015? A flowchart in and of itself is not required, Mike, but you are required to stipulate what your processes are and show that you've determined how they interact with each other. If that can be accomplished with something other than a flowchart, that is considered acceptable. Okay, Narelle Chef asks, moving from other consultancy to PJR required the same stage audits. Narelle, a Stage 1, Stage 2 audit is required for a company that is not yet certified. Perhaps you're asking about a transfer, if a company transfers from another certification body to PJR. Okay. Then no, you're not required to repeat the Stage 1 audit if you are currently certified with another CB and you are transferring to PJR. Okay, any other questions today? Okay, well everyone have a great day and thank you for your attention.